All right, welcome to another Authors at Google presentation. We're lucky to have Reid with us today. Rob is a writer and technology entrepreneur based in Los Angeles and San Francisco. Rob is a founder, CEO, and chairman of Listen.com, the online music company that developed the Rhapsody music service. Rhapsody has since been spun into an independent company and has over 1 million paying subscribers. Notably, Listen was the first online music company to secure full catalog licenses from all the major labels. Rob joins us today as author of the novel Year Zero. It's a novel about aliens with a mad passion for human music. However, unlike Listen.com, the aliens did not secure licenses for the music they love, and the novel chronicles the ensuing intergalactic copyright standoff. Rob's other writings have included a cover story for Wired magazine, as well as prominent features in publications including the Wall Street Journal, Business 2.0, and the Glider Technology Report. He's also written for countless websites, including Ars Technica, Wired.com, and TED.com. Without any further ado, Reid.
Thank you kindly. So as mentioned, today I want to talk about two topics that go together as naturally as peanut butter and jelly, vodka and caviar for you Russians, chocolate and mayonnaise for you weirdos, and of course it's aliens and copyright law. And also about my book, which is about aliens and copyright law. But I want to start by showing you a quick video that at the very last few seconds brings those two topics together as well as I could possibly do it for you today at this moment. And while it does seem probably unoriginal and even perhaps plagiaristic to start with a video instead of speaking oneself, in this case, maybe not, because the video is of me. It's just better edited than anything that I'm going to do right now. It's a very brief TED Talk that I gave at the most recent TED conference in Long Beach, which incidentally feels like it's populated entirely by Google employees at this point. And it's a quick intro to my perspective on copyright law and how, at the very tail end of this video, it relates to aliens. And here it is, and then I will chitter-chatter a little bit afterward. And hopefully this will go right up.
The recent debate over copyright laws like SOPA in the United States and the ACTA agreement in Europe has been very emotional. And I think some dispassionate quantitative reasoning could really bring a great deal to the debate. I'd therefore like to propose that we enlist the cutting-edge field of copyright math whenever we approach this subject. For instance, just recently, the Motion Picture Association revealed that our economy loses $58 billion a year to copyright theft. Now, rather than just argue about this number, a copyright mathematician will analyze it. And he'll soon discover that this money could stretch from this auditorium all the way across Ocean Boulevard to the Westin, and then to Mars. If we use pennies. Now, this is obviously a powerful, some might say dangerously powerful insight, but it's also a morally important one. Because this isn't just the hypothetical retail value of some pirated movies that we're talking about, but this is actual economic losses. This is the equivalent to the entire American corn crop failing, along with all of our fruit crops, as well as wheat, tobacco, rice, sorghum, whatever sorghum is. Losing sorghum. But identifying the actual losses to the economy is almost impossible to do unless we use copyright math. Now, music revenues are down by about $8 billion a year since Napster first came on the scene. So that's a chunk of what we're looking for. But total movie revenues across theaters, home video, and pay-per-view are up. And TV, satellite, and cable revenues are way up. Other content markets like book publishing and radio are also up. So this small missing chunk here is puzzling. Since the big content markets have grown in line with historic norms, it's not additional growth that piracy has prevented, but copyright math tells us it must therefore be foregone growth in a market that has no historic norms, one that didn't exist in the 90s. What we're looking at here is the insidious cost of ringtone piracy. $50 billion of it a year, which is enough at 30 seconds a ringtone that could stretch from here to Neanderthal times. It's true. I have Excel. The movie folks also tell us that our economy loses over 370,000 jobs to content theft, which is quite a lot when you consider that back in '98, the Bureau of Labor Statistics indicated that the motion picture and video industries were employing 270,000 people. Other data has the music industry at about 45,000 people, and so the job losses that came with the internet and all that content theft have therefore left us with negative employment in our content industries. And this is just one of the many mind-blowing statistics that copyright mathematicians have to deal with every day, and some people think that string theory is tough. Now, this is a key number from the Copyright Mathematician's Toolkit. It's the precise amount of harm that comes to media companies whenever a single copyrighted song or movie gets pirated. Hollywood and Congress derived this number mathematically back when they last sat down to improve copyright damages and made this law. Some people think this number is a little bit large, but copyright mathematicians who are media lobby experts are merely surprised that it doesn't get compounded for inflation every year. Now, when this law first passed, the world's hottest MP3 player could hold just 10 songs, and it was a big Christmas hit, because what little hoodlum wouldn't want $1.5 million worth of stolen goods in his pocket? These days, an iPod Classic can hold 40,000 songs, which is to say, $8 billion worth of stolen media. Or about 75,000 jobs. Now, you might find copyright math strange, but that's because it's a field that's best left to experts. So that's it for now. I hope you'll join me next time when I will be making an equally scientific and fact-based inquiry into the cost of alien music piracy to the American economy. Thank you very much. Thank you.
God, it was so easy when it was shown to me. I go to detect displays. What do I go to? Open display preferences, right? You come here. We stop mirroring. Oh, this is sweet. And then I pull up my PowerPoint presentation, and I do that. That was easy. That work? All right. So I know that, with Google Translate and all the local edition things that you guys do, all your local initiatives, Google is a real master of localization, and I wanted to honor that tradition when I came here by basically localizing a little bit of what you just saw to put it in Google terms. Now, the first thing is, I'm sure you remember this very meaningful and powerful infographic from the TED Talk. I stayed up until the wee hours last night running some very, very precise astrophysical calculations, and I can confirm to you that $58 billion in pennies is just enough to connect this building to Mars as well. It helps quite a bit if Mars is at perihelion. But still, so this is equally relevant to you as it was to the TED crowd. Another thing, obviously, I made these observations based on the iPod Classic. I know how you guys feel about Apple around here. So I decided to also translate this into Google terms with the Nexus 7. Now, the Nexus 7 only has 16 gigs max storage instead of 160, so it can merely carry $800 million worth of stolen merchandise and rob us of 7,500 jobs. But if we give one of these things, and I'm sure that will happen to every employee of Google and Motorola, we're looking at $72 trillion worth of economic losses. And to put that into perspective, that's enough money to go to the nearby Maritime Hotel, expanded slightly, admittedly, and we could check in the entire populations of Burlington, Vermont with this money, Fresno, California, and still have room for everybody in Asia. And for slightly more than 2 months, and if we throw in the breakfast buffet, a little bit less than 2 months. So that's my little localization effort. I hope that was helpful. And now I'm going to just talk a little bit about Year Zero. A couple of things were previously mentioned, but just to go over them. Year Zero is the story of a vast alien civilization that is so into human pop music that they inadvertently commit the biggest copyright infringement since the Big Bang, thereby bankrupting the entire universe. All the wealth in our universe is owed to us and to our record labels, and we humans don't quite know it just yet at the beginning of the book. You will all be delighted to know, I hope, that the book is about 2/3 set in present-day New York. The rest of it is rambling across many galaxies and so forth in the way that we like to do in science fiction. Now, the aliens are in trouble because for reasons that are baked deep into the storyline, and we'll all save a ton of time by just suspending our disbelief on this point for one moment, but for reasons that are baked deep into the storyline, they are obligated to honor our copyright laws. And they're also obligated to pay the fines and penalties that are associated with our copyright laws, which they have violated in an unbelievably big way. And this is a problem because, to quote the most authoritative source on this subject that exists, which is my own book, American copyright laws are, quote, the most cynical, predatory, lopsided, and shamelessly money-grubbing copyright laws written by any society anywhere in the universe since the dawn of time itself. Now, that's not my opinion. That is the opinion of one of the aliens in my book. And it may sound like a strangely emphatic statement to you until you consider the statistic, which was cited in the TED Talk, that the maximum fine for pirating a single copy of a single song is $150,000, which, to put that into perspective, in the state of New York, the maximum fine for drunk driving is 1/300th of that amount. Which makes sense if and only if you believe that while drunk driving does indeed have terrible consequences, music piracy, again quoting my authoritative source, leads swiftly to meth addiction, human cannibalism, and societal collapse, which is presumably what Congress was thinking when they passed that rather crazy law. So what happens in the book is that a self-appointed alien delegation comes to Earth to try to fix this terrible situation, and they quickly establish that the only way they can do this is to reverse this complex thicket of laws and international treaties that literally go back centuries. And they quickly determine that the only way they can do this is to recruit a very, very powerful human ally to help them navigate human society and achieve this almost impossible task. And so they're thinking, well, who do we get? And they decide we got to get somebody who has two very rare but important attributes. First of all, it has to be somebody who has unbelievable artistic credibility, because they presume that we revere our musicians as much as they do. We don't, but they're aliens. They don't understand us very well. So that's the first thing they're thinking. Ideally, one of the greatest musicians who ever lived, A. And B, we need somebody who has incredible political might, who through sheer force of will can hopefully reverse this entire legislative mess that we have. And so they think, Bono? And that's kind of where they start. And they're like, maybe we can do better than that. And they dig a little bit further. They get onto Google, you'll be happy to know, and they discover that the most powerful media law firm on the entire earth is called Carter, Geller, and Marks. And at Carter, I made it up, by the way. And at Carter, Geller, and Marks, there is this young attorney named Nick Carter. And they're like, bingo, we got ourselves a Backstreet Boy. And because there was a Backstreet Boy named Nick Carter. And they know this because they're into our music. So they come to Earth and they present themselves to Nick Carter, and they realize to their horror
He's not the Backstreet Boy. He hates the Backstreet Boys because the man has taste, and he is not the powerful partner who founded Carter, Geller, and Marx. He just happens to have the same very common last name as the powerful partner who founded Carter, Geller, and Marx. He himself is merely a very low-ranking copyright attorney, but it's too late. The Rubicon has been crossed, the die has been cast, the horse is out of the barn, the Lohan is into the Smirnoff. It's over, pick your cliche. They are now allied with Nick Carter, low-ranking copyright attorney, and he has 48 hours to reverse this whole insane situation, or something very, very bad is going to happen to the earth. And so I've just summarized the first 4 pages of the book. And the next 353 pages can be summarized with 3 simple words: hilarity hopefully ensues. So that's a little bit about year 0. It's a little bit about copyright law. I'd love to just sort of have a conversation and take some questions. And I want to point out that this is technically what they call in the book promoting trade. Oh, actually, I want to just kind of remind you of one little thing. I'm an expert in copyright math myself because of the whole thing that I did with Rhapsody. And so I know you guys have a big music initiative underway. There's actually a lot of alumni from the company that I started, Listen.com, who are working in music, mainly in Mountain View, folks like Tim Quirk, Zahava Levine, and so forth. So I know of what I speak when I talk about copyright law. So that's, I'm both an entrepreneur and a writer. And I'm more of an entrepreneur than a writer. This is my first novel. And as I got into this, and I started talking to the folks at Random House about what we do once the book comes out, they say, well, you should do a bunch of readings. And I said, well, that sounds great. I can read. And they said, well, we want to tell you one important thing. The last thing you should ever do at a reading is actually read from your book. It's just a terrible mistake. And so I'm going to ignore that advice just very briefly, not because I think that life should be about taking risks, but because I think it's always interesting to avoid excellent advice. And I'm just going to do it really briefly because there's a couple passages here that I think as fellow technology people, you guys might enjoy. So I'm going to actually violate all roles, read at a reading for a couple of minutes, and then we can talk and do questions and that kind of thing. I picked this passage because it's about New York City. I grew up in Connecticut. I spent some time here in the city as well, and I love it, and I feel like I kind of know it. And it's also about social media. So what's happened here is that our hero, Nick Carter, has been visited by the alien delegation, and now he has been summoned by somebody he does not know who, and it turns out to be a bad guy alien who's wondering who the hell this Nick Carter guy is and has also come to Earth. And he's been summoned to some mysterious restaurant in the meatpacking district. So he's left his office. It's about 5 o'clock. He says, soon I was down in the icy, bustling streets. New York in February is New York at its worst, unless you count those 100-degree August weekends when everybody's off at the Hamptons. But you, there's a lot of footnotes in here, he says, which I suppose you should count. So let's call February New York at its almost worst. He's a lawyer, so he's always doing footnotes. The cheery buzz of the holidays is long gone, and the spring thaw is too distant to provide any solace. Add a 3-inch layer of blackened slush, and it can feel like Moscow without the 12-cent vodka. I started walking toward the meatpacking district. 8 blocks on, I found a cab. The crosstown traffic turned out to be so bad that walking may have been faster, but it was nice to get my stricken sinuses out of the freezing rush hour air. He has a cold. That turns out to be really important to the plot, okay? As I settled into the back seat, my phone started humming from a flurry of inbound texts. OMG, Ediary? I'm so jealous. Ediary is the restaurant he's going to. That came from a girl I faintly remembered from college. Next in the queue was this from the cousin of a long-ago roommate. You must have the stuffed marrow rings with a dookie bean reduction. And on it went, 15 texts from distant acquaintances, as well as an actual friend or two. After wondering if everyone I knew was in on some ingenious belated birthday prank, I figured out what was happening. Flutter. Flutter is spelled P-H-L-U-T-T-R. Flutter.com, I have the URL, by the way. It cost me millions. Flutter is a smartphone app that lets you trumpet your every thought and action to an enraptured world by pushing out mini press releases via Facebook, Twitter, Google+, SMS, email, and for all I know, telegrams and carrier pigeons. Being this fascinating can be taxing even for clinical narcissists. So Flutter makes it easy by infiltrating your phone and automatically publishing whatever it learns. In my first 20 minutes of experimenting with the service, every classmate and coworker that I'd ever known was told that Nick just arrived at 200 Park Avenue, and Nick just called United Airlines, and most embarrassing, Nick is listening to Bye 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 by NSYNC. In his footnote, for the record, I was in a goofy mood and listened to it strictly for its kitsch value. Good luck explaining the concept of irony to a smartphone. However awful this sounds, the reality is far worse, and I soon quit the service. I'd since uninstalled its diabolical software a dozen times, but somehow it kept reappearing. This time I'd thought I had finally foiled it by literally buying a new phone. But after a month's sulk, Flutter was back. It had apparently matched the address that I'd looked up on my phone to Eateary, a faddish restaurant it seemed. And once my GPS signal indicated that I was actually heading there, it had informed my breathless public. So what's funny about that passage, I wrote it about 2 years ago because in the physical publishing world, it still takes like a year to get from the point where everything's done, they've bought your book, they're excited to release it, the book is, written, and it actually gets out. So I wrote this over 18 months, I sold it a year ago, and when I wrote this was so completely surreal and impossible that my wife and I just giggled every time we read it, and it just seems to be like 6 months off now, Flutter. So anyway, that's basically the main passage that I wanted to read to you guys. And I am very happy to take questions and chit-chat or let you thunder off to lunch or whatever it is. There's 2 microphones. Please ask questions if there are any. Here we go. Yes, sir.
Thanks for having you here, Patrick. I worked with you guys back in early 2000, and so back there we're licensing music copyrights that listen at the time. Do you feel anything's changed in the last 10 years since then?
Yeah, what's changed is the labels are now, and it's a big change, the labels are now willing to license. And I think that the original sin, in a sense, of the music labels in the world of internet-based music was essentially a 5-year embargo that they put on the market, a 5-year boycott of their music from the internet. And I think that is more responsible to blame for the piracy phenomena that followed than anything else. And so essentially what happened was in late 1998, the first mass market MP3 player, the Diamond Multimedia Rio, was announced. Yeah. And at that point, I was just in the initial phases of starting the company and starting to go around on bended knee to the music labels, hoping to get licenses. And I knew it was going to be bad when, within less than 30 days of the release of this device, the music industry sued Diamond Multimedia in an attempt to make MP3 players illegal in this country. Had they succeeded, it would have been one of those things, automatic weapons, yes, MP3 players, no, in terms of legal devices. And for the subsequent 5 years, the labels not only sued everything that moved in the broader market, but they refused to license their content to anybody who came along and said, we want to create a legal substitute that people can buy as opposed to steal. Now, the problem with that was manyfold. It was basically April of 2003, I think, before the iTunes Music Store launched. We launched before that with an unlimited streaming service, but the world was maniacally focused on downloads at that point. What the world wanted was downloads. And so you had this almost 5-year period when this radically useful and fabulous and fascinating and flexible format came out, and the labels were simply not selling that. During that interim, it basically amounted to a training period, which lasted about 5 years, where people were trained in being very technically adept at piracy, and they were frankly trained at being frankly morally comfortable with it. I want this thing, it's not for sale, I'd sure buy it if it were, it ain't, I'm going to grab it, and I'm going to learn how to get music in this manner. So that is when the piracy phenomena got very, very deeply baked, I think, into social norms, social practices, and the music industry is still paying the price for that. What's very different today is that the labels are willing to license. And so there is much more of a proliferation of services that are out there. I think that a lot of pretty inventive services that really could trigger a lot more music sales, trigger a lot more discovery, are still not being licensed. I mean, my favorite example, there's a great service called Tiny Song, which is a lot like Bitly or Tiny URL, but for music. What happens is you go to Tiny Song, you type in a song that you'd like to tweet out or email or broadcast in some other manner to a lot of people. It kicks back this tiny URL. You put that in your Twitter or other feed, and anybody who sees it clicks it. It goes immediately to a Groove Shark page, and that song starts playing immediately. That's a really cool way to say, hey, everybody, check out the song. They're being sued.
Yeah.
And so it's not perfect in the licensing area, but at least they are licensing. There are a lot of wonderful companies, yourselves included, that are able to do at least some things with music, and that's the huge, huge, huge change. But it came 5 years too late.
Yeah, it was interesting times. I worked at the NMPA and Harry Fox. That was supportive of the suit back with the Rio Diamond, and I had it at work, and people looked at me like, "Oh my God, he just brought in the devil." It was just, and I had to hide it.
It was like you
yeah,
brought in a handgun or something.
Yeah, they and worse,
and heroin.
Worse. They framed it that way, but it's interesting the way today in Google. Our business within Google supports Google Play and YouTube and other clients outside, but we manage about 40 million sound recordings that come through the systems from various, and about 77,000 publishing companies that we license. And you got that one publisher, and they just look like they're like looking at you like you're an alien. So it's listening to this story and about your book, it's incredible. But we live it every day. But the world's still light years away from changing.
It's still a mess.
Yeah,
it is still a mess. Yes, sir.
Hi. So I was wondering, it seems like, ever since iTunes came out, the labels were pretty comfortable with downloads. Like you said, not at first, but eventually they came around. But what about streaming? I mean, you've got services today like Spotify, and they're still missing a lot of A-list artists. And do you think that the labels will ever really be on board with streaming, or is that just... What are your thoughts on the labels and streaming?
Ironically, the labels were okay with streaming, believe it or not, before they were okay with downloads. So we were Rhapsody launched as an all-you-can-eat streaming service. We're kind of we might, when the history of downloadable music is eventually written, we may be viewed as the VisiCalc of the all-you-can-eat streaming service. We're still out there. We're still number, I think, 3 in the market. But Spotify has definitely leapfrogged us, or leapt-frogged us, or however you would say grammatically flawlessly. So they did actually license to us before they got there, and quite a while before. I mean, it was the better part of a year after we got all 5 of the major label licenses before the iTunes store was licensed. And that story about how, Steve Jobs had a brawl and so forth to get that done is very well documented in the Isaacson book and elsewhere. The holes in our catalog and everybody else's catalog, and when I say our, I sold Rhapsody a long, long time ago to Real Networks. They sold half of it to MTV. I'll say our forever. It's not like an affectation. I just can't stop myself. I feel very allied to Rhapsody. But the holes in our catalog and Spotify's catalogs usually, believe it or not, have more to do with things that are at the artist or the publisher level. At this point, the labels are very much on board. Like, we want to get everything in there, but there are weird glitches in certain contracts that prevent that. So I think that it's more just, and the holes diminish. They're asymptotically approaching zero, but asymptotically, it's never going to be zero. It's always going to be closer and closer and closer. The holes were just gaping 5 or 6 years ago. They're more they're almost weird when you come across them now in the streaming catalogs, and there's a few holes in the download catalogs as well.
I think until you have names like the Beatles in there, everyone will perceive there still being holes.
Yeah, and the Beatles were actually the last people to get onto CDs as well, and very famously the last people to get onto Apple. I believe they'll grudgingly come over at some point. And my personal belief is that the streaming model is finally entering the steep part of its curve. If you go on campuses now, Streaming is become so widespread because of the friction-free exploration that it enables. And I think that the key thing was the streaming services like Spotify and Rhapsody and others have finally kind of got portability more or less nailed with sort of caching to the device, and people want to get the music off of the internet and into their lives. And so fixing that was a key thing. And my belief is that about, probably in the 5-ish year standpoint, I'll bet that streaming dollar share is very close and maybe even exceeds downloadable. But man, were we 10 years too early. Yes, sir.
So it seems to me there's a bit of a fundamental distinction between the music and the video situation. In particular, I'm thinking about Netflix, where they have the streaming service and then they have the physical DVD service. And the CEO, for some reason, wants to get rid of the physical DVD service in favor of the streaming service, even though the streaming service in the long run cannot make any money because the companies will just keep raising what they charge Netflix.
Yeah.
Is there a distinction there in that the music streaming business can make money, whereas the video streaming business can't? Is there a reason for that? And is there a reason the music download business can make money, whereas maybe music streaming or video streaming can't?
They're all really, really tough businesses from a margin standpoint, for the simple reason that you need the permission of the majors to be in business. If you're missing even a single major label, of which there are now 3, there used to be 5, the gaps in your catalog are so vast that there's just a great deal of leverage that's on the studio or the label side when you're negotiating your terms, particularly if the whole point of your service is we've got everything and you can explore in a friction-free way. And generally speaking, almost without exception, and indeed probably without exception, these deals are cut for 12 or 24-month bases. And so what the tendency will be, I believe, it has been in the past, that as certain of these services manage to make a little bit of money, the labels and the studios are going to see that because they actually have reporting requirements that they cook into their deals, and they're going to claw back that margin and claw back that margin and claw back that margin. And so I think the margin dynamics are similarly grim in both sides of the business. The area in which they're not so bad, and each business has its little way of still kind of surviving. For us in streaming, it's what they call breakage. And breakage is kind of a weird usage. It's a weird choice of a word for a concept that basically says you are going to have that person, God bless him or her, who pays for your service and really never uses it. And that's, by the way, the same way that like health clubs stay in business and airline frequent flyer programs and a whole bunch of other places. So that's the advantage that the streaming service has. The advantage that the download services have is there is some margin baked in, and it's not bad. It's probably 25 to 30% gross points, which a lot of people make a living off of that. So there's something built in there. The place that actually I think has the best margin dynamics is Pandora, because there are essentially government set rates on what can be charged for non-interactive services. Basically, this goes way back to the 20s when there was the initial brawl between the earliest music broadcasters, AM radio in those days, and the record labels. And the government basically came in and said, we're going to determine what those payment rates are, and that tradition has continued. And so Pandora, by being a non-interactive service, isn't anywhere near as much at the mercy of the labels. So I think there'll be higher margins there. But the margins are kind of lousy throughout the business because the labels are in a position to, oh man, they've gotten, bandwidth cheap is a lot cheaper, and they've done this, that, and the other thing. Let's up our rates a little bit. I don't think these are ever going to be wildly profitable businesses.
Well, Netflix, the physical DVD side of the business, I don't think that the labels can actually. I think they have baked in that to the deals.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, I don't think you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think that they can legally restrict them from selling some set,
From selling and
renting
renting.
some set.
That's a less regulated market, and it's an area where there is more wiggle room. But I think there's also a general sense that over the 5 to 10 year period, the DVD is going to go the way of the CD, and so that's to the extent that there is a differential there, it's temporary, not temporary in the short term, but in the intermediate term. And then, man, that whole business of Netflix separating its DVDs from its streaming business was really a catastrophic error. It was a very, very strange move on a corporate level that their stock price got hammered for. And that's like a whole nother topic. But it was clearly a weird move, as you indicated, for them to try to split the two. And they've learned very quickly that was a bad idea. Any other questions? No? Well, thank you very much for coming. There are books back there. I'll sign them or anything else you bring. I'll linger, and I'm happy to answer questions one-on-one or whatever. And thank you very much for coming out.